What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained. So we are on GUDecks.com looking at God popularity at Mythic rank over the past 7 days. And as you can see, Deception is on top, which makes a lot of sense considering Deception's dominant performance over last weekend ranked event. Uh, Deception's best archetype currently is Aggro Deception. They can also be Control Deception, but Aggro Deception is the current archetype that's on top. Magic is the second most popular god. Magic is extremely versatile right now. They can be control, they can be combo, they can be tempo. However, control magic is the most common and probably the most powerful magic archetype at the moment. Third place, we've got nature, which is always very aggressive nature, like a zoo-oriented deck. They play lots of creatures in the early game. They buff them up, they buff them up, they buff them up, and then they win. And as you can see, nature currently has the lowest win rate out of all of the gods, which is very strange considering Aggro Deception is the best god and the most prevalent archetype overall. And nature has just so many tools to beat Aggro Deception. It's just that the current aggressive nature list don't really run those tools that can beat Aggro Deception, so stay tuned. When we get to the nature deck analysis part of the video, I'll go over a whole bunch of different cards you can add to your nature deck to really increase your win rate against that most prevalent archetype in Aggro Deception. Let's see, back to it, we got Light. Light is almost always Zoo Light. Zoo Light's fairly strong right now. Lots of great Echo cards, lots of great protected and ward stuff. Control Light is way less prevalent, but can also be pretty strong. Death is pretty much always a Nubian Death. Nubian Death's pretty strong, it's very straightforward. And then we have War, the least popular god in Mortal Judgment, or the Mortal Judgment era. War is always some sort of relic-centric deck, like relic and creature-centric. It can be all aggro creatures, or it can be more reactive blitzy creatures, and then they use their relic to end the game. But when your game plan revolves around a relic, you are very easily dismantled by frontline or relic removal, so War is just particularly weak. But now that we have discussed the meta a little bit, let's jump into some decks that you might want to play over this weekend ranked event. Alright, so let's start things off with Aggro Deception. This list was made by Juanito, and he went 24-1 over this last weekend ranked event with this list. But before we talk about this list at all, I want to just take a quick aside and talk about Nemean Lion real fast. Nemean Lion is a core set card. He's existed forever, but it's been gaining a lot of popularity over the past week to couple of days. And it seems like Nemean Lion has been buffed pretty substantially with the addition of Mortal Judgment, and just people are finally starting to realize it now. So Nemean Lion is a 3-mana 2/3 with the effect of gain +1/+1 after a creature with Roar enters the board. So that's your creatures or your opponent's creatures. And Echo is a keyword that was introduced in Mortal Judgment. Echo cards are very powerful, and most of them tend to have Roar effects, especially the Deception and Light Echo cards. The 1-mana Echo card, or the 1-mana version of the Echo cards I'll make, the 1-mana versions are always very powerful. They pair incredibly nicely with cards like Nemean Lion. So gods like Light, Deception, and Nature can make great use out of Nemean Lion. Light's Echo cards almost all have Roar effects, and Light makes great use out of those big wide boards. So if you play the 3-mana 1/1 that gives a creature +1/+1, it gives Nemean Lion +2/+2. The 1-mana 1/1 gives Nemean Lion +2/+2. Then there's cards like Fellow Janissary, obviously, that buffs Nemean Lion. Just Deception and Light have lots of Roar creatures and lots of Echo creatures with Roar, making Nemean Lion good. And then there's Nature, which also has Echo cards. They have less Echo cards and less Roar cards than Deception and Light. However, they have lots of wild synergy cards, and Nemean Lion is wild. And Nature does have a handful of Roar cards that synergize very nicely with Nemean Lion, most notably Bladefly. If you didn't know, Nemean Lion's effect works with all 3 copies of Bladefly, so if you play Nemean Lion on 3 and then Bladefly on 4, Nemean Lion gets +3/+3 for each Bladefly that enters the board, so that's a fun synergy. And then on top of that, its Wild Tag makes it susceptible to be buffed by Wildfires and Trials of the Hydra. It activates Staff of Roots, not that anyone plays Staff and Roots, but the whole point of this aside is Nemean Lion seems like a card that's good in a whole bunch of different gods right now, so if you've got 29 cards in your deck and you're thinking of something cool to throw in, you might want to think about throwing in a Nemean Lion in there. But now, let's get back to the Deception analysis. So this is an Aggro Deception list. it's fairly straightforward. We're all pretty well versed with aggro deception. We've got a whole bunch of strong early game creatures with like high attack values. Switch Duelist deals 3 damage, Armor Lurker deals 3 damage. We have lots of different buff cards, Dark Knives to give something plus 3 attack. There is Baron of Whispers that gets quite large. This deck runs one copy of Fermentary Instigator, which can be just immense reload. The majority of these creatures are guild creatures, so you can draw a lot of cards off of the Fermentary Instigator. Sneaky Bruiser is a card that's been getting or growing in popularity for these aggro deception lists. Just a big beat stick, 5 mana, 4/6. It's pretty hard to deal 4 damage through hidden, and then dealing 6 damage at a time is a lot of damage. Essentially these guild deception decks, or aggro deception in general, they have a lot of naturally occurring hidden creatures, which a lot of gods have a hard time interacting with, and then their Orpheos Distraction God Power gives them the ability to hide their high impact creatures over and over again, like that Whisper Baron, like the Sneaky Bruiser, or a constantly growing Nemean Lion. So if you like playing fast, tempo-oriented decks, or actually just fast decks, not super tempo-oriented, you'll be going face a lot. You'll be ignoring your opponent's side of the board quite often. But if you want a fast, efficient deck, then Guild Deception could be a great choice for this weekend ranked event. Alright, now let's move on to Nature. This is an aggressive Nature list made by H-Pain. And this is a fairly standard aggressive Nature list. This is the 30th episode of the What to Play Over the Weekend series, and we've talked about very similar nature decks pretty much 30 times at this point. But like I said in the beginning of the video, there are a lot of things you can do to modify your nature deck to make it way better against aggro deception, which is currently the best list. And then before we look at those cards, this type of nature deck, it's very popular, it's very aggressive. You play early game creatures, you buff them up, you buff them up, you buff them up, you buff them up, you win the game. Right, so with all that high-octane creature buffing stuff, you could probably outrace some of your aggressive deception opponents, provided you get a very good opening draw and they get a less than great opening draw. But for the most part, it's very hard to outrace Hidden Rush Deception. They're sort of like the best base aggro deck in the game right now, and these aggressive nature decks have dropped a whole bunch of the cards that nature could be using to beat those deception matchups. So let's take a quick look at all the different nature cards you could throw into your deck to increase your win rate. Alright, so let's take a quick look at some nature cards to drastically increase your win rate against aggro deception. Excuse this ugly Word document, just the easiest way to put 4 cards on the screen at one time. Generally, aggro deception is so strong because their creatures are very hard to interact with because they are hidden, and all 4 of these cards don't care about hidden at all. Nature obviously has plenty more spells that go through hidden, but these are my 4 favorites, the best ones in my opinion. Let's start off with Canopy Barrage. Canopy Barrage used to be a card that was in all nature decks, for a very long time. It fell out of favor when the meta had a lot of aggressive war decks that had protected creatures, light decks that had ward and protected creatures, and aggressive magic decks that had warded creatures. So at the time, Canopy Barrage was really weak, and it fell out of a whole lot of decks. But right now, magic decks, the control magic decks don't really have creatures in general, but the tempo magic decks don't have warded or protected creatures generally, so Canopy Barrage is strong against them. Canopy Barrage is, obviously very good in the nature mirror matches. Nature doesn't have any protected or warded stuff. It's still weak against light. Light has lots of protected and warded creatures, but that's just one god. And then Deception is really weak to Canopy Barrage. This destroys a Sneaky Bruiser, this destroys an Armor Lurker, this destroys a Merrick or a Baron of Whispers, pretty much all of Deception's main win condition cards. Canopy Barrage can just single-handedly remove for 2 mana. So it is incredibly powerful. A very similar thing can be said for Lightning Strike. It's more accurate than Canopy Barrage, obviously, and deals more damage. But, the same thing, it can destroy those Baron of Whispers before they can attack, the Merricks, the Sneaky Bruisers, all those big things. Even Guild Enforcers, anything big that Deception's trying to play and hide over and over again. The Hunt can clear multiple boards. Low-Hanging Fruit doesn't get rid of Armor Lurkers, but it can destroy all of those little Echo creatures, as well as, if they had a Baron of Whispers and they hit it twice already, it has 1 health, Low-Hanging Fruit kills that. Low-Hanging Fruit is the weakest of the 4 cards, on this little page. But Canopy Barrage, the Hunt, and Lightning Strike, these cards will greatly increase your win rate against aggro deception. So now that we have taken a look at these, let's see what cards you can remove from your nature deck to make room for these tech cards. Alright, so now that we have looked at all those different cards you can add to your deck, what should we remove from a standard nature list like this to make room for those Canopy Barrages, Lightning Strikes, Low-Hanging Fruits, the Hunts, what have you? Well, let's see. The first things that stand out to me is a card like Bladefly. Generally, Bladefly's use in decks like this is, you play creatures in the early game. If you're playing against a control-oriented deck, they might clear your board, and then Bladefly is a single card that can refill your board so you can get back to buffing. But with Aggro Deception being the most common archetype in the game, they're going to be doing a lot more one-for-one trading, and they'll be doing a lot more of ignoring you. So having a single weak board full of 2/2s, to replace your current board will be less relevant. You will run into like Control Magic every once in a while, where something like Bladefly would be helpful. But against Control Deception, Bladefly won't be doing very much. So if you wanted to take those out to put in some Canopy Barrage or something like that, it could be very powerful. The other ones that stand out to me, we have Celestial Stag, and we also have Veil Warden Minotaur. Both are creatures that, generate you more resources, so great in those control-y matchups. Having creatures that get you more creatures is very good, but it'll be way less relevant in those aggressive and tempo-based matchups. So, something like Celestial Stag being a decent-sized creature that gets you something from the Sanctum for your hand, and then potentially some random nature card in your hand could be helpful, but not great, against Aggro Deception. Getting a random nature card could be good against Control Magic, but Canopy Barraging or Lightning Striking a Whisperer Baron or a Merrick can be absolutely game-winning. Then we have Veil Warden Minotaur, which fills a very similar role to the Celestial Stag. It's a creature that generates you more creatures. Personally, I prefer Veil Warden Minotaur over Celestial Stag, especially considering the deck has Hevnir. Veil Warden Minotaur gets you a guaranteed 7-mana card to give you something to do while you're waiting on your Hevnir to come down. It's a slightly bigger creature, so it's better for taking value trades. And then the healing, it's only 3 healing, but the healing could be relevant in these aggro matchups. If you do end up taking out the Hevnir, then maybe you take out the Hevnir and the 2 Veil Warden Minotaurs, keep the Celestial Stags. But if you remove 2 Celestial Stags, 2 Bladeflies, and then maybe 1 Howler, considering there's no more War's Wake, maybe 2 Howlers is too much. But that's 5 open slots, so that gives you like 2 Canopy Barrages, 2 Lightning Strikes, and 1 the Hunt. And adding those cards to your deck should increase your win rate against Aggro Deception just exponentially. So if you are a big fan of nature, which I know a lot of players are, then an aggressive nature deck like this with those small modifications should be a great choice for this weekend ranked event. And now let's move on to Magic. This week we've got a Control Magic list made by Minami. If you're interested in combo magic or tempo magic, check out last week's What to Play Over the Weekend video. We covered both those archetypes. This week we only have Control Magic. It's the most popular magic archetype and probably the best magic archetype at the moment. It's fairly straightforward. You clear your opponent's board over and over again to run your aggro opponent out of resources. If you're playing a more control-oriented matchup, you ramp up to your late game quickly with things like your Crystal Tech Scholar, and then play large creatures to overwhelm your opponent. Very straightforward generally. The main reason why I'm such a big fan of this list in particular is it makes very good use out of Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is a 1-mana spell. You target a creature, it can be yours or your opponent, and then you delve a creature that costs 1 more and transform that creature into that new creature. So that's a card that's really good against both aggro and control. In the aggro matchups, you do your normal control magic stuff, you clear your board over and over again, and then you play something like the Bibliomaniac or that aforementioned Crystal Tech Scholar, as well as a Metamorphosis. So if you've been clearing your aggro opponent's board every single turn, and then you ramp a mana and end your turn with something like a 5/6 or an Avatar of Nature, that can be absolutely game-winning against those aggressive opponents. A similar thing can be said with the Bibliomaniac. If you've been controlling their board state, you draw a card and then end your turn with like a Wetlands Ogre. That can be very hard for your aggressive opponents to come back from. And then when you are playing those slower control-oriented matchups, you ramp up to the late game, and then you target your Metamorphosis on something like a City Planner, to make it an 8-mana creature, so you get those 2 little walls, and then something big like a Healing Elite. And then there is the incredibly powerful combo with the Achillean Dedicant. You can play this, take a value trade, and then turn it into a 9-mana creature, so kill off your opponent's biggest thing and end your turn with like a Poly or an Echophone or that thing that has 12 attack and God Blitz. And then, besides that, you're just very anti-aggro. You have lots of different AoE board clears. You have your tracking bolts in combination with spell boost, the unannounced arrival, 2 shape blasts, and unbound flames, even an inferno. You'll be controlling your opponent's board state very easily. Crystal Tech Scholar is incredible ramp. It's 2 mana slots or 2 mana locks of ramp, for 1 card. And the Echo version will, being a 3 mana card that draws you a card and unlocks a mana lock. That card's incredibly powerful. And like we said, this card is incredibly good with that Metamorphosis. So if you were a fan of the slow, grindier control decks, then Control Magic could be a great list for you, and I highly recommend running some Metamorphosis synergies, and it should be a good time. Alright, next up we have Light. I have an aggressive Light list as well as a Control Light list to show you guys today. We're going to start things off with aggressive Light because aggressive Light is way more common than the Control variant. This list was made by Solid22, and it's a fairly standard aggressive Zoo Light list. You play lots of strong creatures in the early game, and then you buff them up with your things like Humble Benefactor. You've got your Fellow Janissaries, your Militant Theists, your Radiant Dons, your Holy Enchanters, Prayer of the Desperates, and Asterius. So, you just build a big board, buff everything up, make some value trades, go face, classic tempo game plan. This deck has Thester the Grieving General, which is a very strong card. Almost everything, everything in your entire deck except for Asterius buffs the Thester and his Echo creature, so it's very strong. If you want to spice up the list, you can throw in Anemian Lion, like we discussed in the beginning of the video. But all in all, like Zoo Light is a very strong archetype. It's protected and warded creatures make their creatures hard to remove, and then Light's just so good at capitalizing on their board states with their many AoE buffs. So if you're a fan of those tempo style matchups, taking value trades, going face, and you're sick in nature, then Aggro Light could be a great choice to play this weekend ranked event. But now let's take a look at Control Light. This Control Light list was made by Ryan. We featured his Control Light list a whole lot of times in this series. If you're a fan of the Control Light archetype, then definitely bookmark Ryan's GU Decks page because he is the Control Light guy. He's always tweaking the archetype. And like I said, this is very similar to his old list. It has a lot of order cards, slow the game down. We've got this, slows down 2 creatures. We have Lips or Seal, which can potentially slow down the entire board state. We have the Inquisitor Informant, which is good for slowing down a single creature. We have a copy of Divine Judgment, which can obliterate any of those ordered creatures. And although we only have 1 copy, you can always get more back with your Radiant Embalmer if you need to. Let's see, we also have Lysander's Mercy, which is great for slowing down the board state. Line in the Sand, which is like super sleep. It's effectively sleep, but you can't wake your opponent up. We have the Eclipse, which beats out all of the Nubian Death decks, as well as just it's one of Light's few AoE damage spells. Let's see, we've got Helmna, which is capable of dealing just tons and tons of damage. We have the Heal Like God power that can buff up Helmna's power. It, of course, has its own roar effect. Demo increases Helmna's power. We have the Parthene Parsinium, which can potentially increase Helmna's power. The fact of the matter is Helmna can grow very easily and deal a whole bunch of damage. And then we, of course, have the Infinite Value combo with the newly buffed card Inescapable Duty. 2 weeks ago, this card cost 6 mana. Now it costs 3 mana. Its effect reads, pull a creature from your void to your hand, give it +2/+2, or in power 3, making it a 6 mana card. You can pull another creature from your void and give it +2/+2, which means for 6 mana, you can pick your Radiant Embalmer, and then, get infinite Calls of Duty back, as well as, whatever other card you want, so you can get more demos, more Helmnas, more Cerns, more Archpriests, more Lysanders, you get the picture. It can create an infinite value combo, as well as just a big creature every single turn with Radiant Embalmer plus whatever you want. Ryan has proved week after week that Control Light is a very viable archetype. It may not be the best Control archetype, and it is definitely much slower than Aggro Light, but if you are a fan of the Control Light archetypes, then a list like this could do very well this weekend ranked event. And now we have a Nubian Death. This, in particular, Nubian list was made by Lawrence. A Nubian Death has been the most popular and successful Death archetype for the past couple of weeks. Its playstyle is very linear. You play Nubians, you kill them off when you have cards like Priestess of Taket or Raving Necromancer on the board to capitalize off them dying. This deck also has Skull Scepter to capitalize further off those cards dying. You then bring all those cards back with Land of the Dead, kill them off again to deal lots and lots of damage. This in particular, a Nubian Death deck, also makes use out of the sleep and mill mechanics. We have 2 copies of Siren of the Graves, as well as Sulfuric Rain, as well as Burrowing Scarab, which you can use to draw, through your deck, as well as mill your opponent. You can then use Canopic Hoarder to do those aforementioned effects again, put your opponent's board to sleep again, mill them more. The reason I selected this deck to feature is this deck also runs 2 copies of Wind Up Roller, just leaning even more heavily into the mill archetype, which makes this a little unique compared to your average Nubian Death decks. Now, milling your opponent is kind of risky in this meta if you play against something aggressive, something like Aggro Deception or Aggro Nature or Aggro Light. Giving those archetypes more cards to play might be more detrimental than beneficial, but when you play against those slower control decks or combo decks, milling them will be absolutely game-winning. And sleeping and milling is a way to make those boring linear Anubian decks slightly different. So if you want to play a Nubian Death deck, a deck like this could be successful. But now let's jump into War. War is the least popular god, and it's also the easiest to defeat, like we said in the beginning of the video. Frontline, as well as relic removal, just defeats War. So War is not the greatest god to play at the moment, but this is a War deck. It has a pretty good win rate. This is a more control-oriented Relic War deck, made obvious by the 2 copies of Demo. You're just trading away your opponent's side of the board. You do have 2 copies of Savage Strike as well as Auric Rush, which could help you in those Aggro Deception matchups. But generally speaking, any of the other gods is probably a better pick than War, but if you really want to play War, this is a deck that you can choose. Alright, so it is conclusion time. We've done all the thinking, we've done all the talking. What should we play this weekend ranked in Gods Unchained? Well, you can go with Aggro Deception. It's the most popular god for a reason. It is incredibly powerful. But if you want to counter those Aggro Deception players, you can always go with Nature, of course adding some of those aforementioned tech cards that we went over during the Nature analysis. But whatever you decide to play, make sure you have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!